All right, welcome to the Mythic Movie Maker podcast, where we analyze movies from a mythological perspective. And today we have a treat. We have Simon here, who is a mythographer. And you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and what your projects are and what you're interested in, Simon?
Hi, John. Yeah, I'm a mythographer, so I study, record, and database myths. I um I have a sort of broad knowledge of the world mythology. So you name it, Egyptian, African, Norse, Greek, Celtic. I'm all over the place. And I'm very interested in comparative mythology. So that's the sort of mythemes that join all together across the world, these universal themes that can be found, from say China, to the Native American Indians, that you'll find there's very often myth themes that connect all the world stories. So that's kind of like my little treasure trove. I like to collect them and study them and break them down and assimilate them. And I have a channel on Patreon and YouTube called Mythopia, where it's like the sacred housing of world myths. I sort of collect and compile lots of different gods and goddesses there and talk about mythology. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
And the project I'm really interested in of yours is that you're, I don't know if you want to talk about this, we can cut it out, but is that you are building a myth from
Yes.
scratch.
Yes. If I tell you about that, I'll have to kill you at the end, but we can go there if you want.
I just that's all that maybe need be said about it, but I find that project so valuable. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's my life work, that is. So I mean, I have to go there, but you might not be able to shut me up. In a nutshell, I would say that this myth I'm making is inspired by all the world's myths. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and of course he coined the term monomyth, which is the idea that there is a running through all the world's myths are so many fragments and connective tissues that you suddenly realize they're all sort of singing off the same hymn sheet to a degree, that not fully, but if you put all the world's myths together, you start to find there's an overarching story that connects all of them to varying degrees. And that's he called the monomyth, and he focused heavily on the hero's journey and the hero with a thousand faces. But the monomyth, you can extend that even further. You can talk about, you can go right to the story of creation and for all the world's myths, all the way to the where many of the world's myths have a tragic ending, like in the Norse myths, where the Ragnarok and the fall of the burning down of Yggdrasil, the great tree, and so on. And Hindu myths have the end of the Yuga cycle, where that comes crashing to an end and a whole new era begins. That's a classic sort of
and the
connective tissue. Well,
Titanomachy as well,
yes, correct.
to a
Yes, yes.
degree, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that would be, I mean, you could, yeah, I would say that's a major war, which again, it's very classic in many of the world's myths, where the older gods and the newer gods battle against each other. That's a classic myth theme.
We talked about that in the last episode, what we called the Spirit of the Times.
Yeah, yeah,
And there were five movies we chose from last year. And my belief is right now we're living in a turning point.
yeah, yeah,
And it's, it's kind of obvious on the face of it, which is it's a turning over of generations.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that that's what all those myths kind of are saying to a degree. Like myths mean multiple things, but one of the things I think all those myths are saying is like, the old people die off, and the new people, while they're while the old people are dying off, the young people are taking their society from them and taking
yeah,
it over,
yeah.
and yeah.
I was going to say that appears so often in world myth, doesn't it? So you see a sort of, I'll give an example, like the Norse and the Greeks. They had these older sort of naturalistic wild gods, and they represent the wilderness. They represent the sort of brutality of nature in some cases, and they tend to have gods with bushy beards, fertility gods. It's very much about life, death, sex. They're really primordial. And then you get these civilized gods who bring in
Hmm.
culture, and that would be like for the Norse gods, it would be the Aesir, who are the more cultured and civilized, and then the Vanir would be the older, more sort of feral gods, if you like. And then in Greek mythology, it would be the Olympians versus the
The Titans.
Titans.
Yeah.
So again, this new generation comes in and culls the old and devours them and then take over. But then they later on suddenly become the old gods, and another generation comes in and devours them and replaces them. So there's this churning of the old eating the young, and the old trying to keep the old ways and trying to keep in power. I
Hmm.
would, yeah, absolutely feels like
Past
we're
the
living in
point
that
that
time.
their old ways become so stagnant they don't work anymore.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And then
So
also
it's
another argument to be made that there are some things in tradition that if you burn them away and throw them away, you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so there are some things worth holding on to with tradition that we sometimes throw out so much that we actually lose something vital to our soul, the essence of who we are.
mm,
I would say a great example, a modern one, is religion. You know, in the West, religion, especially Christianity, is on a bit of a decline. It's on a downward trajectory, and we've become much more secular. We're very much more, I think we've become more materialistic.
mhm.
I mean, I would say this generally. Obviously, there's loads of people who might be listening going, hey, I'm still very religious, thank you very much. But generally speaking, there's a decline. And what you notice is that there's a lot more anarchy and less cohesion. People don't seem to be as civil to each other anymore. And the sense
Mm.
of that there's something greater than you and that you're not such a big deal. You know, you have your role in life and there's things much greater than you that you have to be aware of and that you have to live in the
It
sense that you have to be
humbles you.
humble about it. You've
Yeah,
got it.
yeah. So,
It's I mean, I'm just going to play out an idea here. It might not come out very well because I'm sort of just blurting out my mind.
oh, that's what this is all about. Yeah.
Where I read a really good book, or rather, I've read that the writer of this book. I think I've read a lot of his works. His name is Philip Goff, and he wrote a book. See if I can
Hmm.
remember the name now. So I'll tell you what it was about. The book is about how science kind of revolutionized everything. It pushed us to new heights we never thought we were capable of. It highlighted religion in such a way that it started to show cracks in religion in the old world. You know, that the idea that this we thought the earth was the center of the universe, and all of a sudden we start to find out actually no, we revolve around the sun. Oh, the book I was mentioning is Galileo's Error. So this is
Gotcha.
called Galileo's Error. So Philip Goff wrote it, and the idea was he sort of thought at the moment of Galileo, where he suddenly tells us all that we're starting to unpack the reality now of the cosmos, and we are not revolving. Everything's not revolving around us. Rather, we are revolving around the sun. And that was a huge deal because at the time that was really undermining the scriptures
Mm.
to the point where they actually thought he was a radical and they had to sort of like arrest him and lock him away. It was like, do not put this information, literally cancel culture, cancel this guy, get him out, get a shot of him. He's ruining everything. And um, in a weird way, there was something right about their fear because Galileo, he almost represents the beginning of the Enlightenment. And he
Absolutely.
represents where, after that we get, Newton comes along and then unlocks the secrets of light and motion. Classical physics starts to sort of unfurl, and then later on quantum mechanics and so on. So it's constantly digging away at the nature of reality. And as you lift the veil up over the mysteries of the cosmos, the scientists weren't finding any God, they weren't finding anything sacred, they weren't finding anything mystical. They were just finding facts and evidence and so on. So it pushed God to the fringes. And so you could say that was the new burning away the old. But then going back to what I was
Absolutely.
saying, Galileo's error is when we took out. I think originally Galileo believed. I think he was still quite religious. I think most people were. Nobody started off a skeptic because that's a new movement. They were religious, but they were trying to understand the mind of God.
Hmm.
But when after Galileo was arrested and his work sort of evolved and started to expand, people said we've got to remove consciousness. This whole idea of the mind of God, that's just got to go. And in removing that, they may have removed the one thing that was really vital to our understanding of the nature of reality, which is that there's something sacred to all of this, something very important. We can talk about this in Cold Mountain now. I'm
Oh,
sure
I was
there's
just
elements
about
of
to
that there.
say that Cold Mountain is flush with all of these themes.
Yeah, yeah. So life and death and meaning. It's like it's literally, throughout that whole film. I think when you take away the sort of idea of consciousness, this meaning and purpose, you strip bare the meaning, and when meaning goes out the window,
Hmm.
that's when you start to get nihilism and so on. So I would argue right now, this time we're living in is the most fractured, divided, heated moment I've seen. I've never seen this in my lifetime. I've only read about it when I was a kid in school. I remember they talked about, what led to World War One and what led to World War Two. And sadly, I would say it feels like we're living in a time like that right now.
It
So
it
it's
does, but
pretty terrifying.
it's like it's like only the only way to get to good times is through hard times, like the perfect example that we were using in the last episode is like giving birth. It's like who wants to go through that, you know?
Mm, mm.
But the product of that is so beautiful and so necessary for humanity that that we do go through it,
Yeah, yeah.
because and it's also the other thing that's very interesting is we're so just drawn outside of our own consciousness to pursue that, like we're just drawn to have a mate and we're
Mm,
drawn to have the baby, even though we know at the end of the road it's going to be very there's going to be a lot of turmoil, but the product of it is beautiful.
what do you think in contemporary terms the baby is going to be
Oh,
from all
oh,
of this, from the labor pains of what we're going through right now?
oh, that's like asking what a baby is going to be. You have no idea. But there's so much, there's so that's what's interesting about the future, an interesting future because the Dark Ages were a time where nothing changed ever. And that was a time that there was a lot of top-down control from organized religion.
Mm, mm,
Whereas religion at one point was the answer to too much materialism. And
mm.
so I guess we're flipping to a more
Yes.
mythical time. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think that there's a lot, if you watch art closely, there's a lot that is pointing to that,
Mm.
and sort of like hinting at that. Like there's a lot more mysticism in the air. I don't know if you've noticed.
Yes, very much. Oh my God, do I notice? I've drawn. Well, I've created an infographic called "The Great Tree of Religion." So if anybody wants to check that out,
Oh
you
yeah,
can
that's
just
another great.
Google that. Now, at the top of that tree, I've actually written down some of the new religions I think are coming in. Some new ideologies and religions, which is cosmopsychism, idealism, panpsychism, transhumanism, all these new ideas which are sort of saying that they're bringing the sacred back again. They're saying
Hmm.
there's something out there that we're starting to get our hands on. We're starting to understand that maybe consciousness might be fundamental, or maybe consciousness is being generated from the quantum level up. And there's all these different ideas coming in, and it has implications about the nature of reality, because if that's the case, then it suddenly goes, oh, so there's, if consciousness is a part of reality, then is that spirit? Is that what our ancestors referred to as a great spirit or a god and so on? And it's a
Hmm.
new framing of something very old, but giving it a modern interpretation that's more palatable for people who live in the 21st century, because it's very difficult for people to stomach a lot of the scripture and myths of the old world because they don't resonate as strong as they used to, because we've moved on so far now. It's almost like in a fractal pattern, that's a smaller fractal. We're in a larger fractal now, and we need something more relevant for these times. Hence why I'm trying to make a myth for the 21st century.
Yeah, and it's
But yeah,
you're way ahead of the game on that.
yeah, it needs to be done. Joseph Campbell wrote it in one of his last books,
Hmm.
The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, and he talks about the importance of a new myth and it having to be. You can't throw away science, and you can't throw away the insights of philosophy and the insights of the Enlightenment, because they are so grounded in our education system now that we really see reality through those lenses. And so if you went back to the old myths, that for a lot of people they will resonate still, but for most modern audiences, they don't seem relevant. So what
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell said is we have to make people realize that there's still something sacred. We have to, you know, at the moment a lot of people are untethered. They're not connected to anything spiritual anymore. But if we can pull them back with a sense of the sacred through a story that resonates, and he said it has to be able to bridge science and spirituality. So that's exactly what I
Yeah.
have to try and do in the Omnimyth.
Well, it's funny. I've always seen the quantum and it as a sort of just a spiritual quantity, because like Richard Feynman had talked about, like, we scientists, we don't like to think of it this way, but you have to because it's real.
Mm.
That like what's going on in the more quantum you get, I guess you could say, the more it's not ruled by numbers but probabilities,
Hmm.
so we're
Hmm.
going deeper and deeper, and the deeper we go, the less real things get.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yes, very much so.
that's like us reaching into our unconscious, or that's like us reaching up to the spiritual. The scientists think that they're doing it their way by diving into the quantum, and they probably need some help from mythologers to understand this,
Well, I actually think so. So the idea of the omnimyth is trying to unite multiple disciplines. So
Yeah.
I think it should be the story should be universal. So it's something that every. I mean, Joseph Campbell said this: the value, the importance of universality in a myth. It's the bedrock. If a universe, if a myth is not universal, it fails to be a myth. So that
Mm-hmm.
means it has to be able to bridge disciplines like philosophy, mathematics, science, even economics. You know, I know people might think that sounds crazy, but it's something that bridges our understanding of how reality works and does it have meaning? Does it have a sense of purpose? Is there something greater than us that's leading this, or is it just chaos? Is it just an accident? Is it just systems that are running like cold machines in the outer space? You know, a myth is trying to say, well, it's the spiritual one. It's sacred. It's something profound. And in order for us to all get engaged with that, a myth has to be able to walk science, philosophy, and all the things that I said.
Yeah.
It has to resonate with all of them. It's like striking a chord that aligns with every single one of these disciplines, and each one nods its head and goes, "Yeah, that kind of makes sense. That works." And as long
Mm.
as they all find an agreement, you've got yourself a myth. But if you don't
Yeah.
quite hit that chord and it doesn't strike everybody, then it won't make it. It just sort of dissolves and will be forgotten about.
Well, this is the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get to the movie. Uh, but Isaac Newton, when he's talked about, he said, he was into all this occult stuff and
That's right.
alchemy
Yeah.
and things like that, and was very religious. And usually, people will be like, he made all these great discoveries and was a brilliant scientist, and then he did those things too, but it's like,
Mm.
no, 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 to he was able to come up with those beautiful science discoveries because he had that hand in the mythological world,
That's an interesting
that's
take. I like that. I like that because there's other characters and people I've been reading about. So have you ever heard of Ramanujan?
mm-mm,
So he's a mathematician from India, and he was highly religious, and he studied the Vedanta philosophy, which is the Vedas.
mm,
So ancient mythology, and I can't remember the name of the goddess, but he followed a goddess, and that was his patron goddess that he followed, and he believed she was communicating with him, telling him about mathematics and helping him to understand intuitively what mathematics really is. And she was saying it's like the mind of God. You're seeing, the Platonic forms and so on. There's something deeply spiritual about mathematics. And so he wrote to some of the greatest mathematicians in England and said he would like to study in Oxford or Cambridge. I can't remember what it was now. And they weren't that interested until they read his work. And when they read his work, they were absolutely astonished. It was
mm.
some of the greatest maths they'd ever seen in their life. And this is literally an impoverished man living in India who has got no money and hasn't got access to hardly any education. And here's my favorite bit: he this fits amazing. He actually came to this understanding by reading one book that was basically on mathematics, and it was written about like it was like almost a primary school or secondary school level mathematics book just to teach about the basics of math. And from that book and his understanding of Vedanta philosophy, he became one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, and he absolutely blew away everybody's mind. And I would say, with what you said to Newton, some scientists might say Newton's brilliance was something that was just innate to who he was as a person, his brain, his DNA. So despite religion, he was able to come up with these amazing ideas. But what you're saying, which I agree with, it's
Mm.
not despite religion, it's because of
Hmm.
religion. Just like with Ramanujan, I think when you're connected to something deeper and more profound, a greater sense of meaning and purpose, and you start to think almost intuitively rather than just purely on a rational basis, I think you can actually access a really profound understanding of maths. And Isaac Newton, like a lot of other great thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci, I think he was was it called an autodidact? He had
Mm.
multiple knowledge about multiple disciplines, and he was just seeing patterns in them and making great insights. I think he's considered to be one of the greatest minds in history. By the way, when you talk about Isaac Newton, I think he's probably considered to be the top three greatest minds of entire all of history, because he saw things. I've heard it called the magic of the mind, where sometimes people like Aristotle, for instance, was it Aristotle? No, who's the guy who jumped out of the bath and said "Eureka"?
Oh,
You got
Archimedes?
Archimedes. You got him. He's one of those as well. He didn't have any. None of these guys had a foundation to build on. They just pulled something out of thin air,
Hmm.
like a magician. They just literally. Most people will come to some kind of enlightened viewpoint, and like Einstein. But Einstein was standing on the shoulders of other great scientists before him, like Newton. But Newton and Archimedes, there wasn't anything much there before them. They just pulled out these
Yeah,
great understandings of science and physics and biology and so on, just pulled it out their head. They're just the greatest minds ever. They're amazing, amazing people. And which
right.
I got a bridge for you to get us to the film now.
Okay.
That so we're Archimedes, ancient Greece. So we're now going to be talking about Homer, another great mind of ancient Greece, and his work on the Odyssey, and the work that was inspired. What's the film called again? We just watched
Cold Mountain.
Cove Mountain. So there we go. We got a bridge.
All right. That's a great bridge. And this movie is less explicitly, which I love
Hmm.
about the Odyssey than other Odyssey movies, like Oh Brother Where Art Thou technically is the Odyssey. We could do a
Yes,
whole
very much
series
so.
on the Odyssey. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, you could.
But let's start with a quote here. Okay. I wonder if you remember this. A source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nicole Kidman, Ada, was reading
Yes.
with that girl that was helping her out,
Yeah, yeah.
and she read that part. And
Right.
the interesting thing about this quote is a source of little visible delight,
Hmm.
but necessary. So it's
That
more
sums up the
about
whole film, doesn't it?
right? Yeah, it's like
Yeah, you got it.
not the you can only faintly see the delight, and it's necessary.
So I would say that's a good quote to pick up on, because when you think about it, the little delight is that Inman and Ada have a very short-lived, beautiful
Yeah.
love. Oh, it's not a love affair, but they have this little relationship just starting to grow before he gets taken off to war. And that little delight is so profound for him that it feeds him, it fuels him when he has to try and get home after spending 4 years away. All he thinks about is her. And then what's the end of that quote? Tell me that quote again, because I think the end part then sums up the end of the movie.
A source of little visible delight, but necessary.
Yeah, but necessary. And by the end, again, it motivates him to get home, and he goes through the most grueling journey to get home, and that journey for him is necessary.
Hmm.
He has to do it. He has to get back to her because although it was short lived, it means everything to him.
Yeah.
And I think there's a quote earlier in the film where they are asked. I think somebody challenges him a little bit on about. I think there's a blind man he's talking to about going
Yes,
back
I
home to
love
his
that
wife.
scene.
Yeah, and he's very much like, yeah, from the difference between me, the old man's basically saying, oh, there's no need to go home, just stay here, be safe. If you leave, you will become a traitor to the Confederates, and you'll be hunted for abandoning your men. But he's done with the war now. He's done his bit for king and country. He's been wounded. He just wants to go home. He just wants to see his love. He's done. He has literally done his bit for king and country. But in doing that, yeah, that sets in motion the antagonism, which is he's going to be hunted down for the rest of the film.
Well, a bone to pick, slight bone to pick. America has no king.
Did I say king?
Yeah, I'm just playing with you. But you
Oh,
say we're
king and
saying king
country.
and
Of
country.
course. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But well, we
Very
we
much a
find
British
our
saying.
kings in
Yeah,
other ways. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they so the blind man, he asked another thing too, which is like, oh no, the remember Inman asked
Mm,
the blind man, what would you give to see for just 10 minutes if you've never seen
yes,
anything? And do you remember what he said? He said, I wouldn't. I like to stay blind, you know?
yes, yeah,
I've been conditioned this way. Wouldn't you want to see the light, at the end of the tunnel,
yeah.
just to know it? And then that could drive you to live a life more like the light, you know?
I think that's what he represents. I think for Inman's saying I'm different to you because I am willing to see the light again, which would be Ada, and
Hmm.
I will walk 1,000 miles
Yeah.
to do that. Whereas the blind man's going, you know what, I've seen the light, and it reminds me of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawkins had this voice that was created for him using a
Yeah.
computer panel. We're
Yeah.
all familiar with it. And somebody said to him, I can create you a new voice. I can update this and give it this beautiful
Mm.
sound, and you'll sound more natural. And he went, "No, I just like my voice now. It's just me. I just happy to live with it." And so I guess the blind man just reminds us of people who just go, "I'm familiar. I'm comfortable. I've seen the light. I'm okay. I don't need to adventure for that." Whereas for Jude Law's character, it's like, no, that means everything to me, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna give up everything because I'm ready to go back now.
Well, I also think you sometimes you don't even have a choice if you see the light. The light hits
Mm,
you just like that beautiful Ada hit him.
mm,
And he's like, "Well, now I'm screwed because now I have to go back to that. Now that I've seen
yeah,
it, I have to go
yeah.
back to it." And it's a bit matrixy, whereas like if you know if you know what's really going on, nothing in the world matters.
You could think of it like this: he represents the part of Inman or Odysseus
Hmm.
who, if he can choose not to go for the adventure, he can choose to refuse the call. So,
Yes.
so, so in the Joseph Campbellian style, that man represents the moment of the refusal of the call, where there's an
Hmm.
adventure that goes, "Come, join on this journey," and Inman could listen to him and refuse the call. So I think he kind of represents that moment in storytelling. But then obviously Inman is like he chooses, I have to go on this journey. So I would say it's possibly a Campbell moment where obviously most writers who study how to write novels and films and so on, we read Joseph Campbell, and when you read the hero's journey, that's a classic point near the beginning where the universe calls to you saying, I need you to come on an adventure, you need to do something scary and horrifying and brave, and then in most good books they go, nope. Okay, is there anything else I can do? Can I just maybe watch from afar or something? So there's this refusal. I think Skywalker probably refuses the call. I'll have to watch it, Star Wars again. But most of the heroes, they are given an option of stay or go, and the stay is usually very tempting. It's like, by the way, temptation.
Huge theme in the Odyssey. Huge theme.
Huge,
Yeah.
yeah, huge. In on so many levels. Absolutely. We'll get into that. We'll get into
Yeah,
that.
exactly. What is the consequence of refusing?
Oh, I guess it's just stasis, lack of growth.
Yeah.
Loads of us do it. Loads of people throughout their life will have a call and they'll refuse it. It's normal. And you stay where you are. You stay in comfort. But when you stay in comfort, you don't grow.
Hmm.
And most tribes have a rite of passage where they say to you, in order to be a part of our tribe, especially tens of thousands of years ago, there's many great perils and many great dangers out there. So we need to know you can survive out there. So you cannot refuse the call. So all these children would grow up in these tribes knowing there was a rite of passage coming for them when they get to 11 or 12 or 16, and they would have to either go out in the wilderness and fend for themselves, or they'd have to go in a vision quest, or in one case it was absolutely atrocious. I read about the Aboriginal people. They said your rite of passage is we're going to pull your thumbnail off your hand and rip it off, and you've got to just take it. It's to help harden you. I think our ancestors knew that when you're bringing up children into a world that's full of hardship, the way to survive that is to harden them. And to harden them, there had to be rites of passage. For
And
women, it was pregnancy. It's like, get
oh yeah,
ready, this is going to
theirs
be
is
really
built in.
difficult.
Yeah.
There, yeah, yeah. Theirs is built in, and for men, it was like kind of almost built in, if you like. I mean, if they didn't accept the call, then the call would get them because the wolves would come and eat them at the door. And I think that going back to the beginning part of this conversation where we were talking about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, when you throw away your mythology, when you throw away your religion and your ritual, especially a lot of the ancient traditions, you lose the that very important part, the not to refuse the call, but to accept the call, to accept that you have to go through this life, and the only way to really get the best out of it is to grow,
Mm.
is to allow yourself to become a little bit hardened to the hardships out there, but not to the point where you're steel and you've got all these walls, but where you have strength, resilience, and so on. So yeah, that's what happens if I think if you don't refuse to call, you can refuse. There's loads of TV tropes that have played with refusing the call and kept the character deliberately for an
Yeah.
entire an
That's
entire
what a
scene. Or
sitcom is.
yeah, yeah, just stay where I am, just chill out, just take it
It's
easy.
kind of
I've
sad now thinking
Yeah,
about sitcoms.
yeah.
These are people that never grow, you know?
I've refused the call. I've refused the call. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was passionate and I loved it so much. But I would kind of realize the call to me was telling me, you got to go to London. You got to go to London Film School, or you got to go to some kind of film school. Beyond, I'd done a BA, Bachelor of Arts, but I wanted to take it to the next level. But the calling was quite a tough call. It was like I had to somehow get £27,000 together, which I was like, I'd have no idea how I'm going to do that. And I'd have to leave Wales, and I kind of wanted to make it work here, so I
Hmm.
refused the call. And in doing that, one part of me stayed here, and another part of me probably went out there and gave it a go, and somehow managed to find that £27,000. And however that's possible, I don't know. But I remember at that point I buckled. So we always refuse the call, or
Yeah.
that
But
sometimes we take it. Sometimes we actually take it.
thankfully, because I think everybody can identify with that. Thankfully, the universe is generous with its
Yeah,
calls, right?
exactly. Yeah, they always
Like,
come back knocking.
yeah, it's if you like, there's so many times I've heard people's because I love success stories.
Mm,
Like how did you become Quentin Tarantino or how did you become Stanley Kubrick, and they all made gigantic errors at the beginning,
mm.
Um, and sometimes, a lot of times people's calls are not what they think they are either. So I think where you ended up making a monomyth, I think that's far more epic than
Well, it suits me. I'm very much enjoying it. Absolutely. Yeah. That was a call. I mean, that's a call I did take. So I
yeah.
mean, it's required sacrifice. It's required
Mm,
kind of resilience, endurance. I many times I had this analogy in my head, a metaphor where I felt like when I got onto this journey, I set adrift from the beach on a little boat and started sailing out, thinking I'd find dry land and land somewhere. And now a decade on, and it doesn't feel like it's landed yet. It's still like this project's still growing and evolving, and I've left the shore so far behind now. I'm adrift to the great blue yonder in the sea, and
and
if
now you
that's how
have
it
to figure
feels.
it out.
Yeah, so I that's a call I've taken on. I'm still on that journey. I'm very much still embedded in that journey. So yeah, it's the same for loads of people. Some people might think, oh, I've refused the call. I'm not. And then when they look deeper into their life, they suddenly realize, oh, actually, no, I am on quite an epic journey. I am going through something quite difficult. And when they come out the other side, they will be greater for it. They will be what's that saying people like to use? The better version of themselves. I can't remember what the
Hmm.
saying is, but it's that idea that you become a greater version of yourself through the hardships, through the challenges and the temptations and so on. Which again, this is why I love the Odyssey, because that entire hero's journey is perfectly encapsulated
It's one
in that
giant
movie.
struggle. And
Yeah,
the thing that me and my brother were talking about too is like not only was the Odyssey a giant struggle, but the entire war that Odysseus was on was
yeah.
another gigantic struggle, you know.
20 years, man. 10 years of
Yeah.
war and 10 years of going home.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, that's I mean, in Cold Mountain, it's 4 years, isn't
Hmm.
it? So he's away for 4 years, but in Odysseus, Penelope has to wait 20 years to see her husband. She doesn't even remember him when he gets to the end. She's like, I'm not 100% sure this is my husband.
Yeah.
He looks dirty and disheveled, and he looks old and worn. He's got gray hair. Can this really be my husband?
Well, he also doesn't present himself as Odysseus at first either.
Yeah. Was it
That was,
Athena that set him up to that? I can't remember.
oh, I forget.
Yeah.
But it was that was a theme the of the return.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sort of portrayed Odysseus like a Vietnam vet. I've gone through war, I've gone through this Odyssey. Now comes the hardest journey, which is to move past all that and be normal again, you know.
Mm. I haven't seen The Return yet, but does it focus almost, beat for beat the sort of narrative of the Odyssey, or does it focus on a part of it and just stretch it out a bit?
Yeah, that's what it does. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to
Fascinating.
give any more away because I realize
All
I'm
right,
giving too much
I
away,
need to
but
watch it.
I think you'll enjoy it a lot,
Oh,
Simon.
definitely, definitely.
Well, just one
Uh,
last quick thing. In terms of the seeing something for a moment, was it worth 10 minutes to see the real
yes,
world, you know?
yeah,
Donald Sutherland, do you remember his character?
yeah, yeah.
He said, I knew my wife for 22 months.
That's right.
That was worth a lifetime.
Well
Just,
spotted. Yeah.
yeah, just those 22 months satiated him for a lifetime, you know?
Yeah, and if you think about it as well, um, Inman, the fire he has to get home, the passion, the he's willing to walk the hardest road to get home. He's
Hmm.
hunted, he's cold, he's injured, he's constantly in danger, and it's all based on similar to Donald what's his name again, the actor
Sutherland.
Donald Sutherland, thank you.
Yeah.
He only had a couple of weeks or months with Ada, and yet that is enough to sustain him on the entire journey. This is such a different take on the
Hmm.
Odyssey, because this is a tragedy. The Odyssey ends, the hero gets home, whereas this one we'll get to obviously, but it's a tragedy. It doesn't have that same sort of heroic ending. It's something more in more meaningful, I would say, more heartfelt almost because of it. But it's kind of like it renders you a little bit. You're like, oh god, that's painful ending.
I
But
really wanted to get your take on that because it's full of meaning. Yeah, but we'll
yes,
get to
yeah,
it at the end. We'll save the end for the end because
yeah, yeah.
but
But you're right. That is one of the major themes is to have had such a small taste of love at its most perfect, at its most
pure.
some yeah for I mean for Inman, this is the woman I think that meant everything to him. It just obviously they resonated. They had this deep connection, and it fuels him. Yeah, so he will go through hardship for all of that. It's an interesting. I mean, most people would they actually say, "I've met somebody in my life. I had about 2 days or 2 weeks with them, and I would be willing to travel the world for them." I think yes. I think some people would say that. Some people have that experience. So it's a real thing, but it's probably not as common I would have thought as somebody who might say, "Well, I met for 2 weeks, I had a great time, but I'm not sure I'd travel half the half the length of America for them and put my life in danger." But
Yeah.
this is, yeah, that's what this is about. Have you ever seen the film City of Angels?
No.
So Nicolas Cage is an angel, and he decides to fall. He decides he doesn't want to be
Mm.
immortal anymore. He wants to
Mm.
become mortal so he can spend his time with Meg Ryan. I can't remember the name of her character, but he falls in love with her whilst as an angel. So when he becomes a human, he's allowed to feel human levels of love, and he finds it so much more profound than being an angel. But in the movie, he makes the ultimate sacrifice. He makes himself mortal, and he falls in love with Meg Ryan. He kisses her. They have a night of passion, and the next day she gets hit by a car and dies. Right, and this other angel comes up to him and says, "Was it worth it? You gave up everything, immortality. You were close with God. That's all gone. You're on your own. You're a human. You're going to die. Was it worth it?" And he says, just for one kiss of her lips,
Mm.
one the scent of her hair, a moment in bed with her, everything, it was all worth it just for that. It's highly sentimental,
Wow.
highly romantic.
And it's beautiful because it's fleeting, you know,
Yeah.
and there's it's like Achilles in the Iliad as well. Or I remember it best from the movie because I loved that movie when I was a kid.
I get most of my. It's funny. I'm probably more akin to getting my quotes and understanding from the movies more than the books as well. It's because you and me are into our filmmaking, aren't
Yeah,
we?
well,
So
that's our age's Homer,
yes,
you know. So
yeah,
it's like, but yeah, it's like Achilles. You're given a clear choice, and it's a extremely philosophical choice, which is you can either live for a short while and die in Troy
mm,
and be known forever,
yeah,
you know, the spiritual sort of way, or you can have a nice life with a good family and you'll be loved by your wife and children and their children, but you'll be lost to history.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's
so,
interesting. I mean, he was the son of a god, so he was
mhm,
immortal, possibly, or he would live a long time. And yeah, so live a long time, but have a generic nice life, or live a short life but be known forever by all
mhm.
people in all time. And
Live the
for
most
him,
epic life,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
of
the one he
history.
wanted. Most people I know would choose the first one. They just
Me
want to
too.
live, yeah, a
Yeah.
long life and not have to be known forever. But yeah, for some people they want that, and I don't think it's wrong. Like some of the greatest people we know from history, they were willing to burn the candle bright and burn out quickly, but they left a hell of a legacy. So there's
Hmm.
so many people to choose from, but that seems to be. I'm glad they did because they are heroic people to remember. But I don't think I'd want to be one of them.
Yeah, well, that's why it's a choice. You know, it's
Yeah,
a choice with two equal but completely different outcomes.
very
So,
much so.
and settling is also a big theme in the
Yeah, yeah.
Odyssey.
Well, a bit of a plot spoiler. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't suppose
Oh,
people mind too much if we talk of it out
no,
of sync.
there's no spoiler anything
Yeah,
in this. It's just my brother
right.
skips to the end usually
Yeah. Oh,
first.
well, so Inman dies, doesn't he? Inman dies,
Yeah.
but he is immortalized because he has one night with Ada,
Yeah.
the love of his life, and they have a child. So that's a classic in a tragedy. You always give a little silver lining at the end. You go, oh, his children are still alive, but that's what they're saying. He's immortalized. His children will go forward. She will have children, and the child will grow up and have children, and so on. So that's where his immortality comes from. That's his sort of Achilles moment, I guess, in this version. So
Absolutely.
he burns out,
Absolutely.
but he's not forgotten. He's not lost. We mentioned the old man where he accepts the call. It's like an inner call. He's going to go on this journey, and once he leaves, he becomes an outlaw because he's turned against his
He's
own. He's a turncoat, as they say,
deserted. Yeah.
which is brutal, isn't it? I was thinking about that when I was watching this. It's so relevant. This is why myths are so universal. That was, I can't guarantee that was mentioned in the Odyssey or the Iliad about how when you turn away from war, you get killed by your own people if they will shoot you for that.
Yeah. And
Desertion
in the
is
movie, it didn't matter. if they were Union or Confederate, they were
Yes.
all bad guys, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. It's brutal. But it just made me think about, right now in Russia and Ukraine, I've seen people trying not to get enlisted and they're being forced
mhm,
into it. And then there's also people who've
yeah.
done so much war now they want to get out and they're being pulled back in and yeah, it's brutal. And to make this a bit more mythical and relevant, you have to excuse me. It's like 10 o'clock over here now, so I'm getting. Oh
I'm
my god, no,
sorry.
it's nearly 11. My god, so my brain will start to melt, and you'll
Okay.
you'll hear my thoughts slipping up my head. But yeah, it's we are living in a time which is mythical in the sense that it's resonating with the idea of there's a cycle, isn't there, where you have good times. You remember that you've heard that saying, good times make soft men make weak times make hard men, or something. I can't remember if I got this right. And it's a cycle. It
Yeah.
goes around, and the ancients captured this in the idea of the golden age, the silver age, the bronze age,
I was
all
just
the
about to bring
yugas.
that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is that you have a golden age, everything's wonderful and brilliant, and everybody's quite soft. And then all of a sudden they have to harden up a bit because times get a little bit less abundant. And now we have to start farming and so on. So people get a bit harder, but it's still pretty great time. People are still living in general harmony. Then you get to this other age where things start to break down. There's more corruption. Humans start to do things that are they're full of hubris and selfishness and so on. And you get to the last age, the Iron Age, or the Kali Yuga, as they call it in the Hindu scriptures, and it's where we are at our lowest. We are at we are our most immoral. We are most corrupted, and we lose our identity. Father turns against son, and man turns against woman, and the old turn against the young. It's this time of division, and it feels like we're living there right now.
Mm.
And so when you look at the myths and you understand what they're trying to say, there's so much wisdom there that you can apply to the age that you live in. And right now, it just so happens we seem to be living in, sadly, the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga. We seem to be in this very relevant but scary sort of parallel to what the myths told us about
Yeah.
right now in our present. And yeah, it's sobering, but also quite inspiring because you think, God, there's more to myths than meet the eye. They really are universal. The
Oh,
wisdom is
yeah.
so deep. It flows through all ages, and it's there for all people at all times when they need it.
Well, I was never able to remember any myths. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of interested in them as stories,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't make any sense. You know, they don't follow a logical story. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they don't follow some story that you're used to, and so I just couldn't remember them. And then you start
Yeah,
to see them as meaning something and like
yeah,
telling you exactly what the world is, you know,
yeah.
because they're not telling you about the way the world is now. They're telling you about the core themes that humans go through and will always go through,
Yeah,
you
at
know.
all stages, absolutely. It's fascinating. I think that they're myths are quite fractal like. Like I said, the primordial gods get taken over by in the Greek mythology, you've got the protogenoi, which are the oldest gods of all, deeply primordial, very
Oh,
elemental.
really?
Yeah,
Before the Titans.
before the Titans.
Oh,
They then get taken over by the Titans, who then sort of
yeah.
literally push them to the side, and they become the new kids on the block. And then obviously the Olympians take
Yeah.
over, and then
Yeah.
eventually even the Olympians are taken over by mortals.
Yeah.
Mortals take over. So
Mere
it's this
mortals.
constant, yeah. So damn mortals, pesky mortals, and us mortals then bring the gods back by creating AGI. So then the cycle starts all over again.
Yeah. Always. And always interestingly in ways that nobody would ever expect, you know?
Yeah.
It's very interesting. But it's Plato, like Plato, throughout history, is Plato was so incredibly important in the Greek times. And then um he kind of got sh pushed away and then everything became Aristotelian.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Plotinus rediscovered Plato and he was a heretic, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then later on in like the 1800s, there was all this Greek stuff again. And it's like, oh, we're talking about
Greco-Roman. Yeah.
mythology and Plato. And that all, you know, pops up for a reason. It's like, well, they always pop up after a really dark time, you know? It's
Yeah,
like,
true,
or we need to
true.
go back to the myth and go back to what Plato was saying and rediscover these things that we become so separated from because we thought we were so much more advanced and we didn't need it anymore. And
Mm.
the poet
Virgil?
Robert, no, more modern, more modern.
Oh, right.
Um, I thought he's got his book somewhere. Uh, Not Robert Frost. Shoot. Okay. Anyway, he said we're entering a time of magic.
Mm.
And so what does that even mean, you know? And I think what he means is we need to rediscover this stuff again and we need
Oh, yeah.
to acquaint ourselves. And he said something kind of dire about it, which is those who don't rediscover this stuff will fall away and they will die out, you know, at least spiritually.
We need to
Um,
do a podcast on my channel so we can break this down because
yeah,
this is what I'm doing. This is the very nature of the omnimyth is to rediscover the sacred and
yeah,
to sort of build it into a myth. What the way I see a myth is it's a sacred story and it has to be grounded in something supernatural or sacred or divine. If you're creating one for the 21st century, you kind of got to think about what is the sacred.
mm,
What am I going to use to put this? You could go for, in the past we had animism, monotheism, polytheism. There's all these different variations. They're all sacred, but they've got different spins, different takes. Mysticism, dualism, you name it. And so you can think of it like different kind of colored potions. One, you get a story and then you pour a red potion in, that's animism, and that brings the story to life. Or you get a green one, which is monotheism, you pour it in and that brings the story to life, and it gives it a different inflection, a different color, a different lens to look at the sacred. So we've gone through these iterations of different kinds of myths. They evolve either sometimes it takes thousands of years or hundreds of years, but new myths evolve and sort of adapt from old ones. But I would say we're due one now, really. We're due an
mm-hmm.
update. And I've been waiting to see what comes down the pipeline. There hasn't been anything. So I thought to myself, well, I'll give it a go if nobody else is going to do it. I remember when Peter Jackson did Lord of the Rings and he said in the behind the scenes, he said, I was just waiting for somebody to make Lord of the Rings. I was like, when is somebody going to make this? It's going to be brilliant. Come on, Hollywood. And nobody was doing it. So eventually he thought, well, flip it, I'm just going to give it a go because nobody's doing it. So I felt the same way when I was doing this new myth. I thought, nobody else is doing it. I just feel like we need something, not a new religion, but like a new myth, something, a narrative that has meaning and purpose that is universal and connects to all people and gives them a sense of this is the nature of our reality. This is my place in that reality. It both humbles me and it moves me and inspires me, and it gives me a sense of direction where I'm going in my life. And it also redefines the the relationships I have with friends, family, culture at large, and the rest of the world.
Yeah,
A good myth will really redefine your whole relationship to your reality. And so I'm using a modern sense of the sacred, which seems to be all the things at the moment seem to be pointing towards consciousness, which is very much the sort of ground of idealism, panpsychism, and cosmopsychism, which is the belief that consciousness is fundamental to the entire universe, and it's not something created by the brain, it's something extracted by your brain. You're drawing upon consciousness that is literally in all things. So it's inside atoms and stones and mountains and stars and planets. It's everywhere according to that way of thinking. So I thought, do you know what? You could use that to make a new myth. That would be the new
mm-hmm.
color. So it would be like, this could be a yellow kind of potion. You pour it into this narrative, and it brings it to life. And then it's up to the reader to believe in it. And if you believe in it, if you believe in the myth and you believe it's sacred, it becomes something really important to you. And it means that you suddenly see a whole new level of meaning and purpose. And you suddenly think, this redefines my entire, how I feel about myself, how I feel about my life, how I feel about my friends and my family. And
Yeah,
it can hopefully, if they're done right, it can unify people. I wrote an article not too long ago about the Adam and Eve story. Loads of cultures have stories about the first humans. And
Mm.
I think the reason they wrote them is that when we lived in tribal communities, we were very fragmented. You had people living in the hills, in the valleys, in the glens and the forests, and they were, sometimes stealing from each other and raiding from each other. So, somebody goes, do you know what? We've got to unify. We've got to stop being against each other, and we need something that a story that unifies us to the
Mm.
point where it says we're all the same. And they said, right, we're all, and this is one of the earliest myths I think we've reconstructed in the agricultural age. This myth might be 10,000 years old,
Hmm.
but we reckon it was probably in the Levant region, because that's where agriculture really started to take off, and you start seeing early towns emerging. Catalhoyuk is one of them. So it's a really early town, and they've got figures. They've got these little tiny figurines
The
of
T-shaped things, or
that would be, yeah, stuff like that. And Göbekli Tepe, that's their
oh,
temples.
okay,
But
yeah.
they had little figurines as well. And when you
Mm.
look at the figurines, it's a man, very often a man and a
Mm.
woman, and they're standing side by side. And you think to yourself, could that be the
Mm.
first man, first woman myth theme? And then when you realize that Adam and Eve is very much based on this sort of pre-agricultural people, and then when they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they almost enter a world of agriculture. So it's almost saying we used to live in this beautiful
Yeah.
time where you would pluck the food from the trees or dig it from the ground. It was all just there for us. We didn't have to make anything. And then when you get kicked out of the garden, now you've got to start, using agriculture. But that's just one inflection of that mything. But the Chinese have Izanagi and Izanami. The Norse mythology has Ember and Alba, who are the first man and woman, the first boy and girl. Loads of world myths have that myth theme, and you suddenly realize that they're all connected. That you can take them right back to the Levant, where we reckon that the first story was told to unite the tribes, to say we've got to stop fighting with each other. Let's use this story to unite us. We are all connected to two ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
the first man, the first woman, and we're all the descendants of them. So we're all family. We're unified. We're all one. And all of a sudden, towns start appearing. And what's the essence of a town? Tribes moving together, starting to live together, and learning how to live with each other. So it's no longer just family. You're getting other tribes in, and that's where towns start to evolve. And it's almost like that story. I'm not saying it allowed these towns to emerge, but they capture that moment when we started to collaborate and join forces and become something bigger than just a tribe. We became a town. We became
Yeah.
a proto civilization. When I wrote this article,
Yeah.
I gave it a really, again, I went to my silver linings. I actually said, myths are universal. They
Mm.
resonate. They capture some essence of truth, and there is a truth to a first man and a first woman. You and me, we are related, and we are related by two people: mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. And we know these two people are real because they exist in our genes. We've actually been able to sort of unpick from our genes that everybody on the planet has this cluster of genetic code which
Mm.
relates back to two people from the Stone Age. And when I say the Stone Age, I'm talking like 200, 300,000 years ago.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we know they're real because they exist in our DNA. You've got it, I've got it, and they're not literally the two first humans, but they are the two first humans in the recorded history, or well, I say recorded in in history at large, that we know the entire planet related to. So we called them Adam and Eve because they invoked that name, because it was the right name to use. We are all related to them. So there's an actual truth to the myth, to the
Mm-hmm.
point where it's almost like they, at some level, they knew it. They just knew it. We're all connected to these deep ancestors. So yeah, it's kind of true in a weird kind of way. So again,
Yeah.
that's why myths are so amazing. When you really study them, you start to realize they are sometimes grasping on truths that you have to have an intuitive and metaphorical mind. But when you see it, you go, yeah, Y chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve they exist in our DNA. That was
Yeah.
a man and a woman. They didn't know each other, by the way. They weren't related. They didn't know each other, but they could have been separated by 50,000 years or so. But we are all related to them. everybody.
And it's
So
something that
yeah,
feels true,
yeah,
It's not something that we when they didn't have any mitochondrial chemistry go or biology back then,
yeah. That's right. They
And
had
that's one
no
of those
clue
things you
about
were
this stuff.
saying earlier is it's something that they just felt was true just by using only their intuition.
Yeah, the
And
Big Bang's the same. The Big Bang's the same.
exactly. Yeah.
You like all the worldsmiths say to some varying degree. The world began in darkness and chaos, and the waters of chaos were everywhere, and there was just void. And out of this void came a primordial egg or a particle or a hill and emerges from the waters and expands. And inside that egg is either, well, that is the whole cosmos, everything, every star, every planet, every tree and mountain is inside that egg. And when it cracks open, all of reality unfurls. And usually there's a god either outside the egg or inside the egg that then forms all of this into land and sky and stars and so on. And metaphorically, they're exactly on point because that's
Hmm.
what happened. There was a particle of a super force where everything in the entire universe, at the very earliest moment of the Big Bang, was contained in a tiny particle-sized atom that just held everything. Every atom in your body began in the Big Bang. Everything inside of you now.
All of our bodies.
So that's that. You've heard that saying: "Be humble, you are made of the earth. Be
Hmm.
noble, you are made of the stars."
Mm.
So you are made out of the very stuff that came out of that Big Bang. What was it, 13, 14 billion years ago? And somehow our ancestors intuited that with a story that they had no telescopes, no microscopes. They couldn't read the background radiation to know about anything about the Big Bang. And yet the story they describe is so uncannily close to the story of the Big Bang. It's mind-boggling, and they just intuited it. Myths, when you understand myths, they actually become so mind-boggling. The idea that our ancestors just had this intuitive understanding. I personally believe they got there through metaphor, and I'll explain that another time. If you do a podcast with me on my Mythopia channel, I'll tell you
Hmm.
more about it. But they definitely had this uncanny ability to see patterns in nature and be able to from that extract these stories. And of course, Joseph Campbell got one of the greatest patterns of all, which is the hero's journey. And it turns up in nearly every single myth across the whole world, and he sort of knocked out those beats, as we talked about earlier. The call to adventure and the refusal of the call, and there's so much to that. I mean, that's itself a conversation. But the Odyssey is one of the perfect renditions of the hero's journey. In this case, he's journeying home and he has to get back home. But this, yeah, it's all there. The temptations being challenged and hitting adversity the whole way. And
Hmm.
when he comes back, he is no longer the same man. And in Cold Mountain, I would say he comes back sadly in Cold Mountain. He doesn't come back the same man. He's kind of broken, isn't he? He's spiritually he's broken by what he's seen in the war. It's really taken its toll on him. And he says to Ada, I didn't want to talk to you. I didn't want to reach out to you and write you a letter because I'm not the man that left. The man that left you was
Mm.
full of love and passion. I'm now full of angst and fear and anxiety and hate, and I'm broken.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what he says. I don't know. I'm not saying this against Anthony Minghella, who directed it. I didn't quite get that sense he was that broken. I got the sense he really wanted to get back to Nicole Kidman, but he did say at the end, I am broken. I'm a broken
You're
man.
right. That was a bit of showing it or telling and not showing.
Yes, yes, very
Yeah,
much
but
so.
that is a giant part of the Odyssey too, is how to reintegrate yourself
Mm.
back from being broken. And that's what I was saying earlier, is in this movie they kind of took a different way about it. Um,
But you know what? In the hero's journey, there's and it's either symbolic or it's metaphorical or it's literal. But the hero has to go through some kind of death. The person they were
mm,
has to has to die in order for them to become the person they need to be to finish the adventure. But when in the
Oh,
Cold Mountain, he's like,
yes.
he just dies and does not come back. So he kind of gets to the point where he dies, but he is transcended by the fact that through
Yes.
him, Nicole Kidman is able to get back on her feet. Sorry, Ada, the character Ada, is able to get back on
Yeah.
her feet, and she has a child, and she has a family, and she has friends. So he passes a flame onto her. So that's kind of like his survival. So there, the journey is still there. It's just a bit
Yeah, it
more
is. And
metaphorical.
it made me think of a very mystical, interesting, primordial little scene at the very end and like the resolution part
Mhm.
when Cold Mountain is become spring again because the whole movie
Yes.
was very cool. It never showed Cold Mountain in not in the winter until the end,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though it took place over years, I think,
Yeah.
right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, but do you remember when Ada there's a dead goat or a dead sheep,
Yeah.
and she carves the skin off of the off of the dead sheep and puts it on a
That's
young
right.
sheep.
Yes.
What do you think that means?
Wow, I like the fact you're like me. I, a great filmmaker, a great storyteller. Nothing is by accident. Everything is
Yep,
done with a purpose, and they're trying to convey something.
that's how I
And
look at it. Yeah.
I wouldn't, and I would say absolutely that definitely means something. The question you're asking me is, did I actually pull that gem out of there? So there's a scene earlier on where an old lady kills a lamb. She cuts its neck
Yes.
and bleeds it out, so that
Great,
that
great catch. Yeah.
yeah, so that Inman, the hero, is able to sustain himself on its blood and its meat, and he's able to sort of keep going. So she makes that sacrifice. She
Hmm.
sacrifices the sheep to keep him going. And so, right at the end, is it the mother? The mother sheep has died, and she's got to put the scent of the. I'm trying to remember how this works because this is something farmers have to do. Sometimes you've got to get a child animal to another mother to look after it, and you've got to put the smell on it so it will accept it. I'm not quite sure
Oh,
if I'm getting that quite right, but in the UK, I'm sure that the sheep here, if the mother dies or rejects it, if they cover it in a smell, another mother, another sheep might accept it. So again, that's kind of this idea. It captures something there about the end of the film where uh, I'm tired for this now. You're challenging me to pluck out the meaning Anthony Minghella was writing, but I sense it. It's something along those lines about the survival, the continuation. The fact that she has a child now, and that child has to continue without a father. But you've got Ruby. She's not a man, is she? Ruby's been looking after Ada throughout the half of the film, and you can tell she's going to be like a father figure because she's like the hands-on kind of person in the house. So she'll almost become a surrogate kind of parent to that child, as do what the other people, like the musicians. They're there in the family as well, and that woman who has her fingers crushed. Oh god, that was a powerful scene. We'll have to get to
yeah, it
that one.
was. Yeah.
But there's a legacy that's left onwards. Just like that
I
the lamb that
completely
died.
agree. I
I don't think
completely agree.
I wouldn't say I got that quite right, but it's the spirit is there. What about
Well,
you?
the quote that the old lady said when she was talking about the goat, and she had this deep when she knew she was gonna kill the goat. The old kind of mystic lady, she said a goat can give you milk, cheese, and good meat, as
Mm,
well as company, you
hmm.
know. And so it kind of brought into focus for me. There's two separate journeys happening. There's the Inman's journey, which is a journey out of materialism into the spiritual. And this might be a big swing and a big miss, but you let me know what you think. And then Ada's journey is a journey from the spiritual, because remember, she had that big speech about how she could name all the rivers in Europe and she could arrange flowers, but she doesn't know
Mm,
how to grow them. So
yeah,
she's way too airy and spiritual. And then her whole journey was to go from the spiritual down to the material, you
yeah.
know.
She's
And
cultured, she's refined,
yeah,
she's read the great literature. So there's this a sense that she's living a high life, and
Hmm.
as you say, you can say there's a spiritual element to that. And then but then she's brought down to her knees, and it's like, well, now you've got to live the humble life, you've got to put all
Yeah.
that aside and learn again. So yeah, which is a part of the hero's journey. This is what I liked about
Mm.
Cold Mountain. Cold Mountain did
Yeah.
something that most of the Odyssey films, like when I see films based on the Odyssey or inspired by the Odyssey, they very much stick with the idea that Odysseus is the main hero, so the story is 95% about him and his men and so on. And Penelope in the book, she gets a little bit of time mentioned here and there, but in Cold Mountain, Nicole Kidman's character Ada, she gets 50% of the time with
I
Jude Law.
know.
And
I know.
they've elevated Penelope to say, look, let's give her a story arc. And that's something that I'm glad about, that because one of the things I'd say about world myth is it's very heavily male dominated. I've tried my hardest to find loads of female heroines and major characters, of which there are many, but very often you'll find the majority of the time in world myth, it's the male heroic figure that leads the story, navigates the story,
Yeah.
and is carrying the message. So that's why I love Anthony Minghella so much. I'm very sad we lost him. I can't remember, it was 2012 or 13. He had throat cancer and he died
Mm.
from a botched operation, annoyingly. But he's one of the greats. He was such a brilliant
What other
filmmaker.
movies did he do? Because I don't remember that name that well.
The English Patient, which I highly
Oh,
recommend if you haven't seen that one.
that
That's just
movie
an
is very
exceptional movie.
mystical too, as I remember it. There's all
Yeah,
that like as
absolutely.
above, so below sort of.
I would class Anthony Minghella as a modern myth maker because he inspired me when I was a child. He did a TV
Mm.
series. Jim Henson helped him to make it, called The Storyteller, and it has John Hurt, one of our great British actors, doing this incredible job as a gnarly old storyteller with a dog. It's a puppeteered dog, and
Hmm.
they tell all the fairy tales, the Grimm fairy tales, and all of the Greek myths, and
Really?
it's such an incredible show. It literally is probably one of my most nostalgic and probably one of the most important works in my life that inspired me to get into myth and fairy tale and folklore. And all of his work is mythical. All of his work is drawing upon myth themes and mythical motifs. He also did The Talented Mr. Ripley, another brilliant movie. Um, and
Wow.
uh, I'm trying to think of one. There's one other one I should. It's not quite coming to my memory, but he's done one of the great movie, which is yeah, he's a legend. One of my favorites, and he was a very sensitive, empathic,
Hmm.
compassionate man. He was a sensitive artist, so he was drawing a lot of emotion into his work.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was definitely one of the greats. What a loss! What a loss!
Yeah, for sure.
The other film I was thinking of was Cold Mountain.
Oh, I gotta watch that one.
Yeah, he went too young. I mean, he was in his 40s, possibly his 50s,
Oh
but he,
no,
he went too
really?
young. Yeah, he went too young.
Oh,
He
and
had loads
and
more films left in him.
and he was sort of making movies in a time where, well, I mean, The English Patient won the Oscar, so, but
Yeah,
in a time where people didn't really, aren't really, haven't really appreciated that mythological more kind of like a posthumous hero,
yeah.
hopefully.
I'd
Well,
say
we're
so. I
doing
mean,
our
like
part.
like I said, he is definitely a mythologist because I mean, his understanding of fairy tale. If you saw the work he did, you can see it on YouTube. You can watch all the. I think most of them on YouTube. The best way to see it is in a high definition on a TV, but it won't do it justice on a YouTube video. But you'll get the idea of his work on there. That's
I'm
some
gonna
of his
check those
earliest
out.
work. Oh, they're beautiful. The listen, just listen to the writing. His writing is impeccable. What a writer! I think Anthony Minghella was one of the greatest screenwriters. He was just amazing. He
Well,
was an auteur. He was an auteur.
yeah,
He directed and wrote. You don't get many people like that anymore.
not well, yeah.
Yeah.
There was so much, it was bursting with symbolism,
Mm,
like the birds, even. If you just pay attention to the birds in the movie, there's,
absolutely. I picked up on that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's crows represented the future and
That's an
and and
that's an
Inman.
Indo-European myth, by the way. You've got Indo-European myth theme there. The crow is a bird of death, and it
Hmm.
always associated with death. And of course, you see Ada looking into the well. Another
Yes.
Indo-European myth theme.
And
The
that
idea
was
of water.
so, because that's what's so interesting about this movie is it
Yeah,
it can. Hollywood would have made it. They would have just thrown that crap out. They're like, oh, what is that? Oh, throw it away. This guy really focused on it and is
Mm,
like, I'm putting this very mystical aspect into an
yeah,
otherwise, in the Civil War story,
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's super important to like thread those little
Well, I
strains
mean,
of
we know,
mysticism throughout a
America.
story.
You had your fair share of witches and medicine women and so on. So that's in the movie, isn't it? You see the witches and you see the superstition and the wise women. They're
Hmm.
all throughout that movie. Again, Auntie Miguel, fantastic representing women in
Yeah.
movies and the archetype of woman. They're all there. The crone is there. It's
Yeah.
so Indo-European when you look at it. It's incredible. But yeah, the water in the well is
Yeah.
classic Celtic mythology of the water sees to the you use the water, you look into it to see into the future. It's like a scrying tool.
Well, we're
And
going
then
over James Cameron right now, and James Cameron
mm,
is very mythologically into water and what the water
yes,
is and
absolutely.
everything.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So there we go. A brilliant scene. And then in the end, the crows what they fly. In fact, I don't think you see the crows when he dies, but Ada sees the crows. When she
hmm
hears a gunshot, she sees the crows and she knows. And then when what I found really interesting in the way that was shot is when she has the vision, she sees the crows around his body flying all around, and then he falls down whilst they're all over him and he slumps down. Whereas when she sees the reality of it, there's no crows anywhere at all where he is. He just walks towards her and slumps down and dies.
Hmm.
But it's when she sees the crows where she is. She might be like half a mile away from when that happened, but she just knows when she sees those crows crying after she
Yeah.
hears the gunshot. She's like, "Oh my god, that's my vision." Yeah, very very
Oh,
powerful, very
very
powerful.
powerful. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
there was stuff to do about owls, which has spirit symbolic significance. The rooster, when Nicole Kidman was hiding, the rooster was like, "Wah!" like calling her out. And then
yeah,
later on, the materialistic girl that was sort of helping her become kind of a worker. I think Nicole Kidman said something or something about the rooster being a devil, Oh,
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
devil. And then but she didn't get rid of it ever, and it's just plaguing her. And then the girl just shows her how easy it is to kill the devil. It just pops
Ruby,
her
yeah,
head right
Ruby
off.
comes
Yeah,
along. That's the
Ruby, that's
character,
what her
Ruby.
name is. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, she's so funny. She
Yeah, she
goes,
is. Everything's
she
so
just
simple to
snaps its
her.
neck, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, she snaps its neck. She goes, "Let's go stick it in a pot." She sounds a bit like Forrest Gump. I just love it. It's brilliant. And
Yeah.
she's the practical. So you got again. This often is used to show two sides of the same character. You can think of Ruby as a counterpart to Ada. So
Hmm.
Ada is the civilized woman, the genteel woman, and she represents highly cultured. She can play music, and as you say, she can do flower arranging, but she hasn't got a clue how to survive in the hardships of the world.
Hmm.
Whereas Ruby's the exact opposite. She only has ever known hardship. She had a callous father, a cruel father. She's had to get through everything with her hands. She's had to be practical. She's not had any nurturing, so she's quite boy-like. She's quite tough. And you can literally see they're two sides of the same coin. Those two characters, they complement each other. And by the
Absolutely.
by the end, Ruby's got probably, well, I'm sure she's a bit more cultured, and Ada is, as you say, by the end of the film, she's like doing hands-on stuff, getting the placenta of another lamb and washing it, of another sheep and washing it onto the lamb, and she's suddenly become Ruby now. She's gone through her journey.
I would say she's integrated, which is what
Mm.
you want to be, right?
Yeah,
So she started from being too spiritual and learned, and you can't survive. You're just naive if you're too spiritual,
mm.
because we do live in a real world. So, and then so she sort of learned that through Ruby, and she became sort of a full person,
Yeah, yeah.
and and I would say also in Inman's journey, he was started too material, and he was actually, there's this beginning scene is this sort of he was rebirthed in fire, in a
Mm.
sort of way. And it's, there's that difference, like the cold mountain and the fire of
Yeah, it's
war,
good. I like
you
that. Good
know.
point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's just a credit to Anthony again. It's just so visually just stark throughout his journey. Like he met you were a big fan of Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. It's a
Oh,
great,
absolutely brilliant.
great
Yeah. What a
character. I mean,
creepy,
we could
weird
spend
little
a
funny
whole half
man.
hour on just him,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But he was sort of a fallen spirit, in
Yeah.
that way,
Yeah.
like Nicolas Cage. And I don't know if there's any more you want to say about him, but
Oh, yeah, I thought he was interesting because so one of the things we were mentioning earlier is that this film, the story of the Odyssey, obviously, as well, but this film was focusing on the things that lure us. So, for
mm,
instance, Inman is lured towards Ada. He needs to get back to her. So the
yeah.
lure for him is love. It's reconnection. It's the past. Whereas the lure for I don't know the name of the character who is played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, the priest. We'll
Oh,
call him the priest.
I just called him, yeah.
Yeah, he was a very very corrupted priest, wasn't he? He was lured by his loins. I mean, he got a
hmm
black woman pregnant, and he was going to kill
A
her because he didn't want
slave.
people to know what
Yeah.
he'd done. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was like for him, he crossed a major line there. Then he was lured to those women. Remember that was the sirens, wasn't it? With when
It
they all were
was.
like
Yeah,
trying to
definitely.
have sex with Jude Law's character, and he was just up for it. Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is like, yeah, I'm totally up for this. I'm definitely going to stay here for the night. And then Jude Law was able to say no to the temptation, like Odysseus does on the boat. So but that constant temptation throughout the film. Another temptation is when Jude Law's character gets to meet Natalie Portman. She's got a scene in the film, and
Yes. Oh, that was
she
so
it's
beautiful.
almost like she's offering him what he wants, family to settle, to a vulnerable woman for him to look after. There's so much there for him. That she's a single woman, she needs help, and he's a loving guy, and it's almost like that's possibly one of the hardest temptations he has. But he does not break because he wants to get back with Ada, and not even something that pure, because it was almost like a pure temptation. It wasn't something corrupting.
Yeah.
It felt quite pure, and even that was something he was able to resist the
Well, yeah,
temptation.
that
So
was another time where he could have settled easily. Like everything is there on
yeah,
paper, right? And she seemed like a someone who it would have been, it would have benefited both of them equally.
yeah.
And it just
Um,
seems so right.
the Ray Winston, he's one of our great British actors.
hmm
He's always plays a tough man. He was playing a suitor in this one, isn't he? He wanted
Oh no,
to,
that guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right.
yeah,
You're right.
he wanted so badly to get with Nicole Kidman, and just as happens in the Odyssey, where Penelope has to fight off these suitors who are trying to
Yeah.
marry her, and he's such a horrible, snarly, nasty man. You can see he just wants her, yearns for her. So he's also got the lure on her. So it's like there's so much. It's just showing you that what drives us and motivates us, what lures us, and yeah,
Yeah.
that just came across very strongly in this film, very much
It
so.
absolutely did. Yeah, it absolutely did. But, you know, the greatest lore of all is we talked about this in the other episode when we were reviewing The Return. The greatest lore of all and the most significant is the lore of the ideal. Everyone in that movie or everyone in that book is going towards the ideal, which is
Mm,
the ultimate platonic, ideal. And there's a bunch of opportunities along the way to settle with something less than ideal, and they all
yeah,
said
yeah.
no. That's why they're heroes because they're going for the ideal.
What do you think the scene where Jude Law's character Inman he's been captured by the Confederates, and they're going to punish him. Well, they're going to kill all of the people they've captured because they've all run away from the war. And then they suddenly get caught out by the Yankees come along, and they start to fight, and there's carnage, death everywhere, people being shot, and
hmm
Jude Law ends up tied to like six dead men chained
Yeah.
to them. What do you think that represented? Because clearly that's representing something. It's a metaphor, isn't it? What do you think it meant?
Yeah. Yes, I do vaguely remember that scene. That was the scene where Philip Seymour Hoffman, the Reverend, died.
Yeah, that's right. You got
So
shot.
he's I mean it's powerful because it's very symbolic in that he's carrying all this dead weight behind him,
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
It seems to me like all the stuff that has happened to him is all this baggage, I guess,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's keeping him from from reaching to where he needs to be. So he needs to cut all that baggage loose,
Yeah,
you know.
and yet, and yet, despite the fact it's holding him down, it impresses you so much when you see him
Oh yeah.
gathering up the chain and dragging like four, five, six
Hmm.
bodies to try and get down that hill. I was like, wow, that's a guy who, it just shows you how strong the drive is to get back to this woman. It means
Yeah.
everything to him. You know, he's got no energy. He's got a hole in his neck where he's shot. He's dragging these six bodies. You're like, this is Christ, man. This guy's being put through the mill. I also, in the actual Odyssey, in the story, so many of the men die, don't they?
I
You
know.
know, the
Yeah.
sirens eat them and kill them because they're so corruptible, and they're so human and mortal and frail, and they carry all our foibles, and they make all the mistakes. They're lustful, they are foolish, they are greedy, and they are a burden to Odysseus as he's trying to get home. His own men are holding him back. His own men want
Mm.
to, maybe that way they want to stay on the island with the nymphs. So they just don't want to
Hmm.
leave. And he's like, they are again holding him back, and he has to keep pushing through that,
In
and
a way,
he has
in a
to
way,
carry
they're
them.
yeah, they're his
Yeah,
suitors, if you
yeah,
could think
yeah,
about it, you know.
yeah. I like that idea. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're just carrying. You carry the weight of others sometimes as well, and you just sometimes got to cut that off and move on. Despite, you know, you've got to just cut off. I reckon that represents like almost like a spiritual weight as well, holding you down, and you just
Yeah.
got to cut it all off. So yeah,
That's
definitely.
how that's what I got out of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't pick up on the significance of that scene, even though I liked it a lot. So,
Oh, so it's the same when you watch films again and again. You always see deeper into them each time. Like
yeah.
Christopher Nolan's like that. Every time you watch his film, you're like, "Oh my God, how did I miss this in the first
Yeah.
go?" But it's hard not to because he's layered so much meaning into it. It's like God, it's trying to unpick a cotton ball that's all entangled. His films are so complex. You as you unravel them, you start finding more stuff. You're like, "Oh
Hmm.
my God, how much deeper can these films go?" He's amazing, isn't he? Um,
Completely.
So the music, what did you think about the music of Cold Mountain? Because the Anthony Minghella is very what I like about him is he makes the music as big a character as
Yeah.
the main characters themselves, and you'll notice the soundscape. You know that he uses so much traditional music, um, old, genuine, authentic country music from the 1800s. Which I mean, to be able to know the
Really
kind of
cool.
music they sang, yeah, and it gives you that sound as well. How did you feel about that? What did it do for you?
Well, all of the songs, whenever there were words to the songs, were intensely relevant
Mm.
to what was going on, you know? I noticed I don't have any you could probably pull up better significant examples, but I just noticed like doesn't that just suck you into it a lot more having all the music and everything
Yeah, I mean,
be a
just
part of
definitely
it?
just for me.
Yeah,
I love it when somebody takes as much attention to detail as Anthony Minghella does with the soundscape and the music. It just music's interesting because it's working almost unconsciously on you. You don't
exactly.
you
Yes.
know you see what's going on with the characters. You perceive it with your eyes. You're observing it. It's very it's very tangible, but music is more ethereal. It slips in, it goes through the ears. You're not focused on it as much,
Yeah.
but it's doing stuff to you. And it's yeah, Anthony Miguel is brilliant at that. He creates texture and shape with the music, and yeah, it what I like about Love Cold Mountain is it makes me feel like I'm genuinely there. I just
Yes.
feel like he's put me into that world.
Which is the highest compliment you can
Mm,
give to an artist, I think. It's very interesting because I've been reading To a Skylark, the Percy Bysshe Shelley poem.
hmm
And if you read the poem on the surface, it sounds kind of boring because it's like it's just a guy like just in love with this bird that he sees, you
mm,
know. But if you look into it and you sort of dig and dig and dig a little bit more, the bird, he can hear it. He can hear the music of the bird, and it excites him so much, even though he can't see it, you know?
mm.
And it's sort of like what you were saying with the music. Music is so important to us. And when you're watching a movie, it's not really the part that you're paying attention to, but it's affecting you so much. So,
If you watch The English Patient, he has the same composer. I can't remember his name. Gabriel Yared. That's it. Gabriel Yared.
hmm,
He uses him in. the English Patient and the talented Mr. Ripley, and they just work so well together. It's like Steven Spielberg working with John Williams. That
Mm,
that that they were a duo, and they work very well together. The English Patient, I mean, the soundtrack when you listen to that, it's just it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's haunting. It's one of my favorites. So yeah, it just upsets me we've lost him.
I
It just
know.
pains me. It's like when you think about all these great people like Robin Williams losing him, I was traumatized when that happened.
Mm.
You just want to see so many more of these great artists and Kubrick. When Kubrick went, I was like, oh man, surely he had another 4 or 5 films left in
I
him,
know.
and we've
Well,
lost him.
AI,
Oh
yeah. There's
yeah,
imagine AI done by him.
yeah.
Uh,
It'd have been amazing. I
but
don't know.
they're sort of like burn bright Achilles type people,
Yes, that's true.
It
Yes,
kind of
and
goes
and
with
and
it, right?
oh, you brought us full circle.
Yeah.
The people that burn bright. Yes, very much so. Did you know Homer? And I should read into this more because I don't know enough, which is a sin because I should know more about this. But apparently, Homer probably wasn't a person. Homer was probably a mixture of several poets who were writing together in the same period, and then they were put together into one person they called Homer. This is John F. White told me about this, so I'd have to look
I
into it.
mean,
But apparently that's the
then
case.
I'd trust that's good information then.
Yeah, yeah. So it's gutting to think that he wasn't necessarily a real person, but he is now, if you think
Yeah.
about it. Because when I think of Homer, I have a man with a beard, with a gown on, and he wrote those 2 books and a couple of other poems. And you think to yourself, yeah,
Yeah.
he's kind of though is he's become a myth himself. He actually exists
Exactly.
in myth. How can that even be possible that the person who wrote the myth has himself become myth? Because we
Mm.
don't even know, and he kind of we've got this esoteric vision of him in our heads, and yet that's probably not real, and yet we can't take him out now. He exists in history
But
as
maybe that's
Homer.
where his power comes from, is not being a real person. Because a real person, you look at their dead body in a grave or whatever, and you're like, who are they?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah,
they're just a lifeless, bones, basically.
yeah, yeah.
But to be a myth, there's so much more power in that.
I'll give another example. Jesus. So
I was just thinking that, yeah.
yeah, I personally think Jesus was real. But we have no direct evidence. There's nothing historically that you could grab onto to say, there's no records of his death put into Roman sort of narratives. They recorded everything, by the way. They were archivists on a steroid level scale,
Hmm.
and yet they had no information on Jesus. It's crazy, and yet there's just too
Like
much information.
Josephus barely mentions him.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I just think he's probably real, but he feels mythical because there's nothing to ground him, just like Homer. And so you suddenly get this character that feels real and mythical, and it elevates that person. So Jesus and Homer, they just seem to exist in this superhuman state. It's like you weren't real, were you? We just don't know.
Well,
You
another one
know.
is Socrates too.
Oh, hang on. I thought Socrates is real. Oh God, what's going on now? You're going to destroy another one of my great.
Well, well, he probably was,
But
but
again, we don't quite know.
yeah, he conveniently never wrote anything down because he didn't believe in it. And then Plato sort of took him, he could have just taken some crazy guy in the agora and attributed all of his ideas onto him. That's a
Mm,
theory. And it's sort of like it, Plato himself, if he just said, this is me, Plato saying this, and this is what I believe, he would have got shot down. But if he
mm,
was saying, this is the great Socrates, and everyone was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember Socrates. He was an old guy that sort of spoke a lot about stuff. I guess what he said was profound, and they couldn't attack him directly
mm.
because Socrates had been made into a myth. And
Wow.
that
Oh
was
gosh.
that would have, if that's what happened, that is the genius of Plato, or of the people who preached about Jesus.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
they need something mythical to be saying these things because it's more than human. It's above human.
Yeah, once you enter the realm of the mythical, you're immortal. That's it. You last
You're
forever.
yeah, and you're
And
kind of
like I said,
elemental. Yeah.
I suspect Homer was, you know, if John is right, and I mean, I don't think he said it was known. It wasn't like definitely Homer's made up of a conglomeration of different poets, but it seemed like it was likely. I think, for instance, writing styles changed to the point where experts are going. These writing styles are so different; they don't seem to be. Experts are able to read your handwriting and look at the way you
Yeah.
speak, and they can look at and go, "Oh my God, yeah, this is the same person." It's like a fingerprint. And I think if the experts, when they looked at the Odyssey versus the Iliad, they were going, "These are so different. Not just in the story structure, but just the way the poetry is used, the lyrics used, and so on." And I think they were determining these are probably different people.
Hmm.
But it's not just them. Every poet and artist who wrote a myth and, well, orated a myth before, in ancient Egypt, we do. I don't think we know who wrote a lot of the Egyptian myths. We don't know who they were. We don't know. We definitely don't know who wrote the Aboriginal myths or the Native American Indian myths. They're all
Yeah.
gone. They themselves are now
Well,
mythical.
something I was thinking about is, the Greeks were just the first to write down the myths, and the
Yeah, that's right.
Mesopotamians. Those myths probably had been developing over, maybe millennia,
Yeah, they
in an
definitely,
oral
definitely.
way. Yeah.
We've pinpointed that some of those myths go back. There's some myths that you hear that are in Egyptian, Greek, and Roman mythology that might go back 500 years or 200 years before, and then there's some that might go back 300,000 years, and you're just like, what?
Yeah, the mythical passes over. Okay, one last question, Simon.
Go for it. Go for it.
What is Cold Mountain? Is Cold Mountain itself a symbol?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Now that's right to the heart of it, and I'm gonna have to dig deep for this one. Cold Mountain, I guess we know that those living on the mountain are, cold to me is isolated. It's lonely. It's draining. It's lacking not just in physical warmth but emotional warmth. It's lacking
Hmm.
in all those things. And when they separate, in the beginning of the movie, when you start getting a few flashbacks, you do see Nicole Kidman and Jude Law's characters. There are sunny days. You can see, when he's building the house and she's bringing him drinks. It's sunny. It's a bright time. It's not quite Cold Mountain yet, but once he goes to war and we start, and the flashbacks then kind of gets the
Mm.
present where she is now. It's cold. It's dark. It's constantly grim. Did you notice at one point that her house is covered in green ivy and leaves? She can't even. It's being reclaimed by nature.
Yeah.
She's trapped.
It's
She's
kind of a
trapped.
hibernation.
Yeah, so it's cold in the sense that she's isolated. She's cold and lonely in that sense as well. She's isolated from warmth, from love. It's a terrible state. When you see those two separate, he goes into a dark place. She goes into a dark place. So for me, Cold Mountain is a metaphor to
Mm.
say that, when they're separated, they are cold and lonely, and but when they come back together, uh
It's warm
she has
again.
a child, the warmth comes back, the seed is planted, and the mountain comes back to life, as you say at the end. It's a glorious grassy meadow covered mountain. It looks beautiful right at the very end, isn't it?
And then and we'll end it there because we're almost out of time. But
Okay,
and
no
and that
problem.
was the Mythic Movie Maker podcast. Thank you so much, Simon.